Becoming a transportation nerd is a pretty niche hobby to have. Yes, there's always someone who shares the same random interest you do, but it's not something that permeates in the common culture much. If you don't believe me, try talking about it the next time you go out on a date, and tell me how long it lasts. But every good rule has an exception, and nothing gets normies heated up faster than asking what they think about roundabouts. For some, they're the prima donna of infrastructure, capable of solving every problem we have in our society if we'd only build enough of them. For others, it's the latest step in the leftist plot to bring communism to America. For young Stefan, freshly graduated from engineering school, there was no such thing as a bad roundabout, and we just had to turn every intersection in the country into one.
I want them all.
So looking back, I wanted to make a video for anyone else who might be a little bit like young Stefan, someone who knows a lot about the benefits of roundabouts, but wants to take the next step in figuring out where they actually belong in a road system. So, there's a reason why I fanboy so much about the Netherlands on this channel, and no, it's not just because anywhere you drop yourself on Street View is disgustingly beautiful, but it does help. The real reason is that this postcard of a little nation is one of the few that actually approaches transportation in an at least somewhat scientific manner. To get my point, try picking up one of their design guides written by the CROV. Yes, it may not be the most interesting reading, but as you go through it, you'll actually read it like a piece of technical literature. You'll learn why something is the way it is, instead of the usual, because we told you so. And there's even sections where they admit their own ignorance on a topic and ask third parties to share their results and knowledge with them. Could a document like the North American METCD ever claim to do something similar? By direct comparison, it reads more like a completely arbitrary cookbook. So since transportation engineers were allowed to practice their field like a science, it didn't take them long to realize that not all movements are created equal. They learned that you could split up movements into different kinds of categories, like long through movements, short through movements, access movements, and residential functions. And each category could have a design that caters to its needs. Organizing designs this way is a big reason why it's so common to see perfect streets and roads in the Netherlands. And having perfect streets and roads makes designing perfect intersections easier also. Think about the classic street-to-road intersection as an example. The road is designed for short but efficient through movements. The street is designed for access movements and residential functions. So to preserve these desired movements, at the intersection, the road gets the right-of-way and the traffic on the street has to yield. But what happens when there is a road-to-road intersection? How do we set up the intersection when both roads are supposed to have priority? As you may have guessed, this is where our trusty tool, the roundabout, comes in. Single-lane roundabouts can move more vehicles per hour than the classical four-way stop, and it does it safer since it removes the T-bone in head-on conflicts. But it's important to remember that the roundabout is only really relevant when both intersecting travel surfaces are roads. By contrast, streets are not meant to carry through car movements, so roundabouts at a street-to-street intersection tend to be pretty suboptimal, since car volumes and car speeds are already so low. At this point, it's more about landscaping instead of traffic benefits. Now, this framework of thinking is only made possible by splitting movements into different types. How would a nation that doesn't do it scientifically approach roundabouts? This is where it gets complicated. For instance, the United States gets a lot of hate online for how it handles transportation. And it's deserved, believe me. But it isn't exactly unique. Other nations like Canada, Australia, Mexico, or even European nations like Belgium also don't take a very science-based approach to their travel surfaces and do plenty of nonsensical things too. like building roundabouts reactively to problems instead of anticipating them ahead of time and building them proactively. A road designer from my home state of California might see this intersection with a major track record of crashes and just react by saying, "Hey, I've heard that roundabouts can make intersections a lot safer. Let's build one here and stop all the major crashes from happening." And to the road designer's credit, it probably would. But it couldn't offer the same level of benefits that a proactively and scientifically designed travel corridor from the beginning could have. Why? Well, here's one example. This is the N200 road in the town of Harlem. Because it's classified and designed like a road, its job is to move through traffic between Harlem and the beach town of Bloemendaal. So because we want the through traffic to be efficient, the number of times traffic has to stop is reduced. Merging traffic from adjacent streets have to yield to the traffic on the road, and the number of road-to-road intersections is minimized. And when it can't be avoided, then they build a roundabout. That means on the entire 7-kilometer route from the center of Harlem to the beach at Bloemendaal, there's just 7 road-to-road intersections, of which 4 are single-lane roundabouts. The result? A safe and smooth flow of traffic between Harlem and Bloemendaal for nearly the entire 24-hour period of the day. Now, just compare that to your typical Strode setup in North American sprawl. Because these travel surfaces were built unscientifically, and more like someone copying a cookbook blindly, there is no designated road for one specific through movement, just a series of 4 to 6 lane travel surfaces intersecting one another in a grid, requiring huge intersections to be built frequently, which reduces the average travel speed to a crawl. Just trying to hit a fraction of the performance of the N200 road in an environment like this would mean spending tens of millions of dollars and years of construction building double-lane roundabouts every 250 meters. And it could have all been avoided ahead of time if the travel services were developed where some focused exclusively on the through movement and others catered only to the access movement. It's a similar story with residential roundabouts also. Yes, it might make the immediate area around the intersection more safe, but it can't do anything to change the fact that the nature of a high-speed road is really incompatible with the residential functions of a neighborhood. If scientific principles were applied proactively, only streets meant to carry access movements and residential functions would run through the neighborhood. And the high-speed road meant to carry through traffic would run along the outside of the neighborhood, which would completely remove the need for the residential roundabout to begin with. So yes, roundabouts can solve problems, but they're also not a magic bullet. And they definitely won't fix all the issues caused by civil engineers brainlessly copying and pasting design standards to the completely wrong context. When the Dutch build a 2-lane roundabout, it's usually in a rural area. This is because in the scientific approach, we know that travel services with a lot of traffic carrying potential makes them incompatible with the access movements and residential functions of built-up areas. So these roads go around towns and through rural areas. Side note, there are exceptions, but most of these are scars from when the Netherlands was trying to speedrun towards American-styled carpocalypse in the 1960s. And when these Dutch 2x2 roads intersect with other travel surfaces, this is where they'll then opt for a 2-lane roundabout. But they use a few tricks up their sleeve to make them safer than the classical setup. They opt for a turbo roundabout style, which eliminates the weave conflict, and the roads entering the roundabout do it much more head-on, which requires a sharper turn and a reduction in speed. And pedestrian and cycling facilities are preferred to be grade separated. Stepping outside of the Netherlands, there's lots of issues on the design of double-lane roundabouts itself that we could nitpick about, like allowing cars to weave across travel lanes or trying to approach roundabouts tangentially instead of head-on. But the biggest difference I think you'll find is that they try to resolve different problems. The Dutch recognize that it's not a good idea to run travel services with lots of traffic potential directly through cities, so they try to do that as little as possible and go around instead. So the problem that the Dutch Turbo tries to resolve is how to intersect two rural-ish roads safely and efficiently. However, many nations never decided that running travel surfaces with heavy traffic potential through cities was a bad idea. So it's very common to see 4-lane or 6-lane stroads crisscrossing cities around the world. One of the many consequences of this is that the left turn movement from a minor street onto a 4-lane road can be particularly dangerous, even with a center turning lane. So when other nations try building their own turbo roundabouts, you'll often see them built inside of the urban area, trying to make that left turning movement much safer. There's times when a roundabout just isn't the best solution practically. I know, I'm sorry. But roundabouts at the point of intersection take up more room than a signal. And in an urban area, space often comes at a premium. If the space isn't available, we can always compromise with a smart signal instead. And in rural areas, there can come a point in traffic volume where a smart signal is just more efficient than adding more and more lanes to a roundabout, Arc de Triomphe style. In many Dutch signalized intersections, the road flares out to have at least one lane per direction of travel. This means a smart intersection can react much more efficiently to the types of traffic present and can come up with all sorts of custom turning motions, which keeps traffic moving more efficiently with less space than what a massively sized roundabout would need. And it's also preferable for pedestrians and cyclists. Instead of having to navigate a quagmire of uncontrolled crossings, they can get their own programmed phase and cross in one singular motion. Roundabouts aren't a perfect solution. At the end of the day, it's a tool in a transportation engineer's belt. And like any tool, the quality of work you can produce often has more to do with how talented the person using it is instead of the merits of the tool itself. If you're a civil engineer who only got a crash course in transportation science, best of luck to you. You'll probably end up using the roundabout like duct tape, slapping it on every leak you find to keep a broken down system running. But with a good background in transportation science and an empirical framework of thinking, you can rebuild the system from the ground up, and keeping the roundabout ready as a tool for situations that best suit it.